Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the May Community IT Innovators webinar. Thank you for joining us today to learn more about our best practices for implementing SharePoint Online. Today's webinar is the second episode in our three-part series on using SharePoint as an online document management solution. And be sure to join us next month as we continue this series with a review of alternate solutions for online document management and compare them to SharePoint. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the President and CEO of Community IT and the moderator for this series. We'd like to share a few webinar tips with you before we begin today. Most importantly, we encourage you to interact with us by asking questions via the GoToWebinar chat feature. We'd also like to remind you to avoid multitasking during the webinar. You may just miss the best part. If you do miss the best part or need to leave the webinar early, we will be posting links to the recording and slides on our website, YouTube channel, and SlideShare account. In case you're not familiar with Community IT, our skilled and certified team of IT professionals serves the greater Washington nonprofit community, helping organizations of all sizes and capacities to advance their missions through the effective use of technology. We're deeply invested in the nonprofit community, having served over 900 nonprofits since 1993, and we take a strategic and collaborative approach that fits the unique needs and culture of nonprofit organizations. And now, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters, Johanny Torrico and Abdul Musa, to introduce themselves. Johanny, Abdul, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Johan, and thank you for inviting us to today's webinar. I am again Johanny Torrico. I'm the VP of Operations here at Community IT, and with my colleague Abdul Musa, we are actually part of Community IT's SharePoint practice. And I really hope that you enjoy today's webinar and take away some tips to make your SharePoint implementation successful. Abdul?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As Johan and Johanny said, I'm Abdul Musa. I'm a senior consultant at Community IT, and I'm a member of the SharePoint working group at Community IT. And I look forward to run this webinar with Johanny.
All right, that's exciting. So this is our agenda for today. We hope to accomplish these three things during today's webinar. We hope to give you good tips and tricks for a successful implementation of SharePoint, and hopefully along, and also give you some advice to avoid SharePoint failure, and show you kind of our framework and process to walk you through a path to a successful implementation. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Abdul. Abdul.
Okay, thanks, Johanny. So we're going to start with a quick recap of our last webinar, the April webinar on selling SharePoint. So the on selling SharePoint webinar was just our attempt to kind of give a realistic overview on benefits and some challenges of SharePoint. So I'm going to go through that really quickly just to catch people up with kind of the journey so far on this SharePoint series. So in the slide that's in front of you right now, I've listed some benefits and some challenges, and we're going to walk through those really quickly. So the first one is obviously SharePoint is an enterprise collaboration platform. So it has features such as centralized permissions, access management, reporting, co-authoring, external sharing, versioning. It's obviously a Microsoft product, so it integrates well with Microsoft Office. And also, it's on a very reliable and highly available platform. So that's really the major the first major benefit is you're getting a very solid platform. Second benefit is accessibility. So it's accessible from multiple computing platforms, tablets, PCs, mobile, and different OSs, and it works relatively well on all of them. The next one is in regards to how you actually use the product. So that has to do with findability and discoverability. And what I mean by that is how easy it is to find data when you need it. So well-designed SharePoint sites make it quite easy to to find data, much easier than traditional file servers, and maybe much easier than some of their competitors. So that's another benefit. And then next is it's a very extensible platform. So SharePoint is a very, very rich platform, and if you are using the Office 365 implementation of it, it's even richer because it incorporates or integrates with Skype for chat, Delve for discovering data, Yammer for enterprise social networking, and also obviously email. So that's another kind of benefit of using the SharePoint. And then something that kind of goes along with that is given how rich it is, it can be a double-edged sword because it sometimes happens that some organizations try to use SharePoint for much more than it can successfully do. So yeah, it's one of those it's very rich, but one has to use it wisely. So in terms of challenges, I'm going to switch over and talk about some of the challenges. The first one is obviously SharePoint represents a paradigm shift from a traditional file server. So you have differences like introduction of metadata, browser-based access to documents rather than using folders, no more File Explorer or Finder if you're on a Mac, and some of these shifts or changes can negatively impact user adoption if they're not appropriately addressed and managed. So those are one of the challenges. The next one is something I mentioned just a few seconds ago, which is metadata overhead. So there's a little bit of extra time required with managing metadata, and that can be frustrating to end users when they're learning SharePoint, especially if they don't understand its power. So it's important to communicate kind of why metadata is necessary. Next is saving attachments. So my colleague Steve in the last webinar had mentioned how you can take a few more clicks than one would like to save attachments. And then the last kind of challenge has to do with synchronization issues. So out of the box, there isn't a sync client for Macs, and even though we don't generally recommend syncing SharePoint libraries, there are instances where it might be necessary for one-off. So for Macs, there's no native client. There's some third-party clients. And then on the Windows side, we find that when we use the sync client, we need to refresh it from time to time because it often stops working. So those are some of the benefits and challenges. And this was meant to be a quick recap for anyone who either forgot the content or didn't make it to our to the last webinar. The webinar is available, so if you want to check that out, you can definitely do that. So now we're going to switch gears and go to the content of what we're going to be talking about today, which is what you need to do for a successful SharePoint implementation. So therefore at Community IT, our process generally involves 4 phases. We start off with an evaluation phase where we're answering the question of, is SharePoint the right solution based on the client needs or based on my needs, and what possible solutions are out there if it's not SharePoint. So that's the first phase. So this is just to make sure that we're getting the right information to to move forward. The next phase is the planning phase, where we start to review the current environment, start to make decisions on migration strategy and roles for stakeholders and project team members that are going to be working on the project or the deployment. And then next phase, after we've kind of collected this preliminary information, is the design and testing phase. And this is where a lot of the work is done. This is when we work on information architecture, developing metadata, content types, libraries, that sort of thing. And this is also when we start to incorporate SharePoint design best practices, and also start doing some training of end users who are going to be using the deployment or the system. And then finally, we wrap up with a production, which is when we start moving data, start having users to really use pilot sites and really use it. At Community IT, our approach is we really emphasize a phased approach to deployment, and we're going to go into that in a little bit later, because we think it helps to really manage the deployment process. So this might mean either moving one team or department at a time, or maybe moving a regional office at a time. And as I said a little earlier, we also usually like to have a pilot phase where end users can test, give us feedback that we can incorporate into the process. And we find that the earlier you incorporate, some of these, the more your user adoption is gonna go faster. So these are some of the things that we generally like to highlight early on. And what underpins the entire process is governance. And governance is where you make decisions around who's gonna have which libraries are going to be accessible to what users. This is when you start to make decide, okay, who has permissions to what, who can make what type of decisions, which of my libraries are accessible to external users. Those kind of questions that really determine how the environment is going to be used. So that really, that really, underpins the entire process, and it's something that needs to be revisited or addressed throughout the entire process. And even after post-production, governance is going to be something that's going to really make it so that your SharePoint deployment is, nice and neat. And with that, we're going to, jump right into the evaluation phase. And Johanny, you can take it away.
Yep. Thanks, Abdul. That was kind of a great introduction to this webinar, and a great summary on that. The methodology that we use here at Community IT to implement SharePoint. So let's jump into evaluation. So these are kind of the 5 main things that I think an organization needs to kind of focus on and think through to have, have that successful first step into implementation, and that's kind of looking at the solution. So the first point is SharePoint the right solution? And I think we have equipped you all, with that unselling SharePoint, thinking through the different benefits and challenges. And Abdul just actually summarized all of those, and that was a great list that he put together. But those are all functional requirements. I mean, it's a better collaboration. Are you looking for better remote access? All of that is great, but also keep in mind that you also need to kind of, fulfill some technical requirements, such as, what type of computers do you use in your organization? Is it a Windows environment versus a Mac environment? Do you use Microsoft Office heavily? And what version? All of these are things that you need to keep in mind, because some solutions will play better with, with the requirements that you have. It's very important to lay those out. Another thing to keep in mind is pricing. If one of your drivers or motivation to actually move to Office 365 SharePoint Online is the nonprofit pricing, make sure you qualify for that. I mean, if you're already an email, that's great. But if an Office 365 for nonprofit using Exchange Online, that's great. But if you're not, make sure you qualify, because just being a nonprofit doesn't make you eligible for that. They have a list of requirements. So make sure you think that through and apply ahead before you embark into this, SharePoint project. The other thing too is what type of documents are you planning to contemplating on migrating? Do you have a lot of images, videos, or is it just plain documents? This is important because if you do have a large library, a media library, then you might need to look for another solution for that, because SharePoint might not be, the right solution to manage all your images and videos. So the other thing also is, have a clear idea of what the business need is. The one thing that I would advise is identify good use cases. If you don't have, if that, and we're going to talk more about that. So that's one. The next one is expertise level. So if you don't have that capability inside your organization, make sure you look for a third-party vendor or an IT partner that actually can help you think this through, go through the different phases and stages of an implementation. And here at Community IT, we do that. We engage with organizations and their stakeholders to vet the solutions and develop a very sound IA plan, information architecture plan. So that's enough for the advertising. But yeah, no, and no, seriously, make sure you look for that expertise level, because that is very important for the project to be successful. Time commitment, it's a big thing, and user engagement. A SharePoint implementation is not an insignificant undertake. So you have to be upfront with your users and your champions, and we're going to talk more about who your champions are, but you have to be upfront on the time commitment they are going to make, and also make sure that you involve all your users early on. If you don't, if a SharePoint project gets developed only by one person in the organization and has little or no feedback from your users, that SharePoint implementation is doomed to fail. Because if your users are involved on implementation early on, they are going to have a stake in it, and they're going to they're going to more likely be positive towards a solution that actually they have helped develop. So they are invested on that. So this is, quick tips on evaluation. So we talk about, start with a clear business use case. If you want to retire your file server, if you want to ditch it, that's not a good business case to pursue SharePoint. Make sure you are not embarking into, SharePoint projects just because you want to replace your file server and you want to decommission it. That's not a good reason. Do it because you want to improve remote access. You want to, have workflows around business processes and document usage. And if in the process of getting all of these functions accomplished, you get to retire your file server, that is great, but don't do it because of that. So that's it with a clear business use case. And another tip, plan appropriate timeline for deployment. And review the different options. So, it is also it is important also to pick the appropriate stakeholders so you get good representation on the organization, and you don't want to only management. You want a mix of people, management and staff. Make sure you appoint your champions, and because they're going to help you drive this forward, and we're going to talk more about champions later on. Also, here I want to emphasize again the time commitment needed to embark on this type of project. In terms of timeline, do it at the right time, and don't schedule it when they are competing priorities already eating up staff time. An event in July, don't schedule your implementation to start in July, because it's going to require a lot of time from your users, management, and stakeholders. Microsoft doesn't make it easy. So Microsoft doesn't make it easy either. So we have OneDrive, and then we have SharePoint, and now we have Office 365 groups. So when do you use what? A couple of weeks ago, I attended a SharePoint conference, and Benjamin Ueli from ShareGate, which is a tool that we use to migrate content, he presented this and put it this way, like, you use OneDrive for your personal files, and you can share those files ad hoc, but if it's just for your use. SharePoint, it's a very complicated platform. It has a lot of tools and a lot of functionality, and you can accomplish a lot of that, but it's a big undertake. So if you have a need for a site to collaborate with others, but also has some processes that you can automate and benefit from that, then SharePoint is your answer. But if you just if you just want a team site where you just have a quick library, you don't need metadata, you don't need a structure, you just need something for this team to collaborate in this project, and that's going to be closed right away, then Office 365 groups might be the answer. And I just throw this slide here because I want to kind of also get you through thinking through the different options, not only outside Microsoft but also inside the Microsoft umbrella. And we're going to talk more about these during our next month webinar, so stay tuned. So Abdul, you want to kind of walk us through the other areas of evaluation?
Yes, thanks, Johanny. So as Johanny said, in our next webinar, we are going to take a look at what other options, if you do your evaluation, you determine that SharePoint is not the right solution for you. What other options are available, and what do they provide? How do they stack up against SharePoint? So with that, I'm going to just quickly go through some of the other options that we've deployed for our clients and how they stack up in some key areas. First one is Google Drive. the Google Drive is part of the Google Apps Suite. So it's a platform kind of like Microsoft that incorporates, mail, chat, video conferencing, calendar, and social networking features. One of the biggest, features is, very powerful search. Obviously, tagging is available. It doesn't have the rich taxonomy features that SharePoint offers. There's also obviously good mobile accessibility. In our experience, we find that Google Drive out of the box is more suited for ad hoc or individual sharing. So sometimes, if your needs for document sharing are kind of complex, it might not, meet the need. And in general, we've also found that, if you really, if you like the platform and you want to use it, you usually need a third-party add-on such as Better Cloud to provide some of the, enterprise features such as reporting, access controls, etc. To really make the experience more robust for the enterprise. In addition to that, the integration with Office is getting better. There's a Google Drive Office plugin that allows you to edit, save, share Microsoft's Office documents, saved in Google Drive from within the Office applications. There's also a browser extension that would open documents saved in Google Drive with appropriate Microsoft Office applications. And then cost. So the Google Apps for Education version is free for nonprofit. So again, as Johnny said earlier in the presentation, it's important to make sure that you qualify for these discounts from these vendors before you undertake it, so you don't get a sticker shock later on. The next kind of alternative that we've worked on at Community IT is Box. So Box is typically recommended for scenarios where file sharing or document management is the only need. So you don't want some of the features like like Delve or the chat or enterprise social networking. You just want, a solution that provides you, document management and file sharing. So Box seems to fit that niche. It has a very intuitive interface, and its sync utility integrates well with Windows Explorer or Finder on the Mac, so that it has that going for it. And then in general, it has good integration with Office, so you can save documents directly to Box from within Office application, and the mobile access is also quite good. Box costs about $5 per user per month for nonprofits for the business plan, but I know sometimes it's possible to negotiate and potentially get better pricing. But as of the last few projects we've done with Box, I think that was the price they were giving for nonprofits. And then lastly, Dropbox. So a lot of us familiar with Dropbox from using it for personal use in the consumer space, but they've been building up the enterprise features. Dropbox is really a good option again for organizations that don't need some of those additional features that the Google Apps platform and Office 365 platform offers, such as chat, etc. So if you just want file sharing or document management, and that's all you want, it's it can provide that need. The sync tool is probably among the best, if not the best, in this space. The interface is quite simple and intuitive, and but we found that Box is really suited for small organizations. So you're talking like 12 to 10 users or less, because it doesn't have some of the enterprise access controls that large organizations would require. There are also and along those lines, there are also some quirks around sharing nested folders. There are also some quirks with version conflict resolution and renaming folders that you've already shared. It integrates quite well with Office. In general, has a good mobile app, and also something else, another positive, it integrates well with some other social media platforms or some other cloud platforms. So often you find the save to Dropbox feature. So that's kind of one cool feature. The pricing on Dropbox for nonprofits, again, this is one of those things that's probably some room for negotiation, is about $9 per user per month for the Dropbox for Business plan. So that's a quick overview. As I said, stay tuned, or join us for our next webinar where we go into more details about some of these options to SharePoint. Johanny?
Yeah, that's great, Abdul. Thank you. And again, I mean, there's more to talk about this in terms of, management, administration, and even governance. So I think that's great. So Abdul, now you want to walk us through. Well, I'm gonna kind of introduce the planning a little bit. So go ahead, Abdul, and start talking to us about the planning.
Okay, thanks, Johanny. So, as Johanny mentioned, the evaluation, or as we mentioned at the beginning, the evaluation phase is really the first way you're getting some use cases, assessing your needs, evaluating your current environment. After you've done that, the next step is, the planning phase. Then the first stage is the pre-planning, where you're, again, doing some, taking some of those needs that you've gotten and trying to, dig deep into them, and also reviewing your current environment. You're also, during this phase, you're also doing, the next will be migration, where you're evaluating which are the potential migration strategies should I use, depending on my scenario. And we're going to go into that in a little more detail a little bit later. And then lastly, roles. And this is where you determine if you have enough capacity, or if you need to get external help from an outside consultant, deciding who are your champions, who are your stakeholders, etc. Johanny, move on to the next slide. Thank you. So as I said, in the planning phase, the first thing we go into is into this pre-planning, where we're really assessing some of the needs we compiled at the evaluation phase, and trying to work through that. So this involves doing a content review and discovery of your current environment. So one of the tools we use at Community IT is 3Size Pro. So with 3Size, you can run it. It runs for, depending on what your data set is, it runs quite fast, and then it gives you a very graphical view of your content. So it can tell you what percentage of your content is are images, so that because that might influence whether or not you need a special system to deal with images. It tells you when the last time data changed. So are you an organization where 80% of your content has not changed over the past 3 years, or are you an organization where most of your content is fresh? That helps with the architecture, which we're going to do in the design phase. Additionally, during this phase, you want to start thinking about some quick wins that you can have. So you want to start identifying from the use cases and from your needs assessment, what are some things that what are some easy ways that SharePoint could improve my colleagues' work? How can I speed something up, or how can I make something less tedious? What process does the accounting department have that makes it take a whole day to print out checks or to process payroll? You really want to think about those things to say, okay, how can SharePoint really be an enabler to make it to aid with user adoption later on and limit resistance to using it? For example, if you're an organization that sends out contracts to external parties before you start, working on a program, and you typically, email the document, they print it out, they sign it, they scan it, and they email or fax it back to you. SharePoint could potentially automate some of these with electronic signatures and make this a 5-click process rather than a email, print, sign, scan, email, fax, and you get the idea. So that's an example of getting the need from your evaluation from your evaluations phase and really translate that into a quick win that you can demonstrate to staff that, okay, when we deploy this is how it's going to make things go better at our organization. Another example is if, for instance, you have a regular file server and you archive documents after a certain number of years, either for compliance reasons or for whatever. If you're doing this manually now, or if you're using a third-party tool, SharePoint has records management and compliance features that can do this for you automatically. So that could potentially save time if you're doing this manually, or if you're paying for a third-party tool, that could eliminate that cost for that third-party tool that you're using. So these are examples of kind of how you can identify some quick wins that will aid adoption. And then the last thing is better search. So SharePoint has a well-designed SharePoint site has good search, and that could lead to potentially finding documents that you either were not given the right name or you don't know when it was created, but you know it exists. So with that, I'm going to have Johanny talk us through some migration strategies.
Mm-hmm. Yep, thank you, Abdul. So these are kind of three strategies. You want to move your existing content to different document libraries in SharePoint, or you want to start fresh, or you want to have a self-driven approach. So on the first one, like Abdul mentioned, there are tools that can actually help you, and actually I recommend running through your existing content with the 3-size Pro. It's a good one. Run it and see which documents have been modified and or accessed in the past 6 months to 1 year, depending on or 2 years, whatever is kind of your time window. So this will inform you how much storage you'll need, because even though you get nonprofit pricing for Office 365, if you have kind of a threshold of how much storage you have SharePoint free, and so you want to kind of think through how much content you want to move, just so that you keep those price levels at the level that you want. I would also say that have a strategy to archive the content that you're not going to move, and some ideas there can be you can actually save all that, archive all that content locally on a hard drive, on an external hard drive. That can be one. Also, you can actually create an archive, a library within SharePoint, a SharePoint site, and move all that content there. You can also actually leverage OneDrive, and OneDrive has unlimited storage, and you can create an archive account, move all your content that you want to archive there, and and just if it's not active content, you can have it there and access it whenever you need it, or grab a document from there and move it to a SharePoint library if actually you archive a copy that you need it later on. So those are kind of some ideas that and strategies on what to do with your historical data. So once you actually identify the content to migrate, another thing to keep in mind is that you're going to need a tool to move that content to your document libraries. And that is going to allow you to keep the file attributes, things like the creator of the document, the date modified, or the date when the document was created. Those are things that will be kept if you use a third-party tool to migrate your content from your file server to your to a SharePoint library. Unfortunately, these tools are generally expensive, but if as Abdul mentioned, if you have very good sound use cases and you can automate some of those processes where you have to like Abdul mentioned, scan this, fax that, put it in attachment and to email, you have to kind of review it, attach it back, send it back to another user. That process takes time. So travel requests, check requests, things like that. So think through that, and that is actually gonna the tool is gonna pay for itself if you actually can demonstrate how much time you're saving when you're automating all of these processes. So that's the first one. Starting fresh. So this is kind of the easiest, and it actually might work if you're just opening a new organization, or you just or it's just you're opening a new office. You don't have the need to move any of the old content. And actually, at Community IT, we use this strategy in our for our projects team. We built a library for the projects team, and our project manager started using it right away. He didn't actually move any of his old project documents. He just moved his document templates, and he started using it right away, fresh, and it was okay with him. So there are some occasions where you can actually make this work. And the last one is the self-driven approach. This is an alternative to move content. So what it means is, your users actually will drag documents into the libraries, targeted libraries. The downside to that is that the historical file attributes, like the ones that I mentioned, will be lost, you know. And so, for example, if the user John Smith moves all the agreements from the project X folder to your, and he does it today, and he move it to this SharePoint library, then all of a sudden, all of those documents are going to have him, John, as the creator, and then the modified day will be today. So, you know, so those are things that you're going to give up if you have your users move content themselves. And if you're okay with, you know, losing all that historical, that, you know, attributes, and then that's, you know, it might work for you. Another downside also is kind of might be user confusion. If you have a lot of content and a lot of libraries, you know, to move content to, it might be too much to ask from your users, you know, where do I move this document to? And so it might create some confusion and frustration around your users. And all this depends, of course, on the complexity of your architecture. So keep that in mind. Abdul, do you want to talk to us about roles? Abdul?
Picking your team for your SharePoint deployment is the last step in the planning phase. So this is where you really, you know, assemble a team to play different roles during the pre-planning phase. As Johanny mentioned a little earlier, you know, you want to start with looking at evaluating your internal capacity and determine whether or not you need an IT consultant or you know, to assist you with deploying your SharePoint environment. You could decide to, you know, get assistance either for specific phases or for the entire life cycle from, you know, evaluation to deployment. So it's really up to you. So that's kind of the first thing to say, okay, do I have, you know, enough capacity? Do I have a SharePoint guru on my team? And for some larger organizations, there's actually an, you know, SharePoint admin to do this, or do I need to, you know, go outside and get some external help? That's the first step in the process in choosing your team. Then the next is, you know, just choosing your stakeholders, and this involves just, you know, just making sure all, you know, departments and hierarchies in your organizations are, you know, are represented, and picking, you know, someone to represent, you know, all the voices in your organization across all levels, because if everyone in, you know, throughout your organization is going to be using this solution, you really want to make sure that, you know, someone represents a voice. So for instance, if, you know, you're an organization where, like, you know, 50% of your staff are in the field, maybe they're social workers, for example, and, you know, they're using their laptops to, you know, input data directly into, you know, or they will be using their laptop to input data directly into solution. You really want to hear from, you know, a few people from that group to get a sense of, okay, this is how we work, and, you know, just so you put the right design elements into it. The next, another important part of, you know, the team that you're going to build in terms of roles is choosing a champion. And we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to, you know, by the end of this webinar, we're probably going to beat this like a dead horse. But it's really important because, you know, you need to recruit a champion. It helps to have someone from senior management, because they give the project a lot of visibility, and they help to emphasize the importance of project success. But it doesn't have to be someone from, you know, senior management. It just has to be someone who has enough time and energy to really, you know, push this through, and who is good at, you know, getting buy-in from the other stakeholders and from, you know, colleagues outside his or her own department. This is very, very important, and you know, it's really important that this person is chosen, you know, wisely. Joanny is gonna, you know, again, given how important this role is, she's gonna talk a little bit more about kind of some things to, you know, think about when choosing a champion. Joanny?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Abdul. So that was a great introduction to this slide, and this is, you know, some tips. Who are my champions? Well, your champions, they don't have to be necessarily technical. I would suggest actually to be sure that once you find that great business use case that is going to save you tons of time and money, make sure your champions are actually involved into this. You want to make sure that they see the benefits of this solution so that they can be the evangelists for the rest of the team. So keep that in mind. They will actually definitely help you drive adoption. If they're happy, they're going to talk about it, and that's what you want to do. So you have more people in the organization wondering about SharePoint and what can SharePoint do for them. They need to have a direct connection and knowledge of the organization needs. Like I mentioned, you want these champions to understand the pain points of the document flows, and that's going to actually help you make an informed decision when you're building your use case scenarios. Be sure to provide enough training or high-level training, because they're going to be the point of contact to users. So, if a user doesn't know how to do X, you want your champion to, kind of guide them through this. They also, just to emphasize again, they need to understand the business operations and the flow of the information within the organization. So make sure you keep that in mind. All right, Abdul, you want to talk to us about design and testing?
Thanks, Johanny. So the evaluation and planning phases are the preliminary, phases of, our process. And once you've done that, you really go into the real heavy lifting. So that's the design and testing phase. This is where you start to, develop metadata, develop your information architecture, incorporate some SharePoint best practices, and start, working on end user training and adoption. At Community IT, our process typically starts with, meeting with representatives from, different departments to understand their business process. We follow that up with, talking about their data, how they use the data, their workflow, inputs, outputs, and how they generally get work done. These discussions help us to get a better understanding of, the data flow within each department and across the entire organization, because these all obviously have they kind of go hand in hand. So that's kind of where we start things off with in the design and testing phase. Joanne, you want to move us along to the next slide, please?
Sure. All right, so let's talk about a little bit about metadata and some tips there. So first of all, probably most of you already know what metadata is. So metadata is data about your data. So in simple terms, if you think about your file server for a moment and look at the folder structure, those folders are organized and classified in a way that tells you something about the information of that document. So you may have a folder called projects, and then subfolders underneath for each year. So you see now you have a document label with a project name and the year, and that's metadata. So some pointers here, you want to keep it simple as possible. When you are reviewing the different document types and kind of thinking through what metadata each document needs, you might be tempted to overdo it. And you need to make sure you kind of stop yourself, and you don't want to, if you have, 3 different, metadata for each document type, that might be plenty. So don't overdo it, because the more metadata you add to your content, the greater friction in adoption. So you want to make sure you keep it simple. Inventory your document types and assign a specific metadata for each. And I want to kind of give you a quick, example of what I'm talking about. So here in this table, we have a document type. What is the purpose of that document, and what metadata is assigned to that document type, plus the process. And I think if you start kind of outlining the different document types, you can use this table and pick the processes that are actually going to have the greater return on investment. Okay. So Abdul, with that, you want to talk about the general best practices?
Sure. So as Johanny kind of alluded to, we after you've kind of undertaken some information architecture and figured out some of your metadata, the next thing you want to do is you want to start incorporating some SharePoint best practices, and that involves, a few that, we generally do at Community IT. First one is having a consistent look and feel across your entire SharePoint deployment. So as end users go from one subsite to another subsite, from one library to another library, the navigation elements such as logo placement, navigation menu, themes, they should be very consistent and should also provide clues to assist the end users with navigation. It should also help them to know where they are in your site hierarchy. So if I'm, 2 folders deep, 2 levels deep, I should know that, okay, I am in this site, and this this library. It shouldn't be a maze where, like, the end users are guessing where they are. Additionally, if your design elements, such as, for instance, advanced search, they should be consistent across all your libraries. So, for instance, if you have advanced search in one document library, it probably makes sense to replicate it across all document libraries so that it helps with just kind of learning the system. Another example I like to give is if you're using managed metadata navigation, which means on the left, you based on the metadata on the library, the structure of the navigation, works with that. You really want to replicate that across all libraries and not just make it that, okay, the accounting library has these navigation features or elements, but others don't, because it really confuses end users if they're going between libraries. The next best practice is around external sharing. And when I say external sharing, I mean sharing with partners outside your organization. This is one of the most critical design decisions because it directly affects content and who has access to content, and it can also help preventing accidental sharing with people who have no business accessing your data. And again, like I said, when I say external sharing, I mean with like external partners like board members, partner organizations, or vendors. In general, we recommend creating sub-sites or sites specifically for content that's going to be shared with external partners, and then disabling external sharing for all other sites in your environment. So what this means is, if, for instance, you're developing a brochure with a designer, we recommend creating a specific site or sub-site for that work, and then making that and then enabling external sharing with that, so that your external your graphics designer who's a contractor can work on that, rather than enabling sharing on all sites and then sharing on an ad hoc basis. That's our general best practice. Okay, create a specific site or sub-site for that use, and then disabling it for all others. Sometimes, though, your design might not make that possible, and in that scenario, we take a different approach where essentially any content that should not be accessible outside, sensitive data such as HR information or finance information, you want to disable external sharing on those sites. So the first approach, which I started off with, is an approach where you're only sharing data that you want others to see, and you're disabling others. This approach is taking different look, where essentially, if for some reason you have to enable external sharing on multiple sites, then you definitely want to make sure you create a site for content that should not be shared with any external partners. So that's kind of a critical design architecture decision that needs to be made. And then lastly, it's regarding site design. At Community IT, our best practice is really to keep site design at the site collection level, because it really affects multiple parts of your deployment. So this affects things like content types, manage metadata, and how these interact. You really want to think through this very critically and make sure you're making this at the site collection level, not at the sub-site level. An example that I like to give is if, for instance, you create a content type. Let's say you have a fictional company with 2 different libraries, one for the accounting department and one for the products team. and both of these have, a content type called client. And, client will have metadata like client name, location, etc. And if you create this at the site level for each, it means you have two different content types with the exact same data that, are not really the same. So if I make a change to the client content type in the accounting department, it will not reflect in the project. So for instance, if I decide I want to add industry to say, okay, or segment, so I know, okay, how many of my clients are in, in advertising, for example. If you create this new field in the content type and you create it for the accounting, for the client content type, it's not going to reflect in the project, and vice versa. However, if you had created this content type at the site collection level and inherited it, then when you make the change at the site collection level, it propagates to both libraries. So that's an example of, a tip of, of some general best practices that, that can you should be aware of as you kind of walk through your design process. The next phase of the design, or the next stage, is the design, and this is where you're getting input from end users, starting to give users a sense of what the SharePoint environment would look like, incorporating some feedback from them, providing training, empowering your champions and power users with more information to make them more comfortable with the platform. This is when you do all of these. So you're gonna, like I said, do some of the things that listed here: collect feedback, incorporate changes, provide training, and empower your champions and power users. One potential approach could be, start by building a training site, and then after you build a training site, then you give a quick training on navigation basics for anyone who's not familiar with SharePoint, where you show them basic navigation, basic navigation tips and how to use it. Then after that, you might build a test site where you actually upload real data and have them use it for about a week, give you feedback on that, and then based on the feedback you get, that's what's gonna make it into your production site. So you've basically created this test site where they've played with data and used data, so they've gotten very comfortable with how to use SharePoint, and based on the feedback they've given you, you're incorporating that into basically the next phase, which is going to be production, which we're going to talk about in a second. You will need to provide extra training for power users because they really drive, and your champions, because they really drive the process, and they can be resources for your colleagues for when you're not available. So production, as I said, is thanks Johanny. Production is the next phase in our methodology, and we always emphasize a phased approach with a lot of iteration, because it helps to get lessons learned that you could use in other parts of the process. We also put a lot of emphasis on user adoption and training. It might require group trainings, one-on-one trainings, using short videos. You might also require being creative and coming up with gamification techniques. Like for instance, the first department that watches all the training videos gets a pizza on Friday for the next month. Or you might give points for everyone who finishes the training module, and the first person who gets 100 points gets like a T-shirt that says I'm the SharePoint guru, things like that. So these are some tips to help you with production, with the production phase. And again, as I mentioned in the introduction slide for the production, we emphasize the phased approach where you start small. This could mean building out one portion of your site first, or it could mean building out a demo site just to get some lessons learned quickly. It also helps with identifying quick wins. It also helps with lessons learned that you could build on for other parts of your site. Additionally, it also leads to fewer problems because you've kind of broken it down into manageable chunks. So by doing it this way, you're not working on 10 departments. You're not going live with 10 departments at a time and having to think through 10 different potential problems. You're doing it or sets of problems. You're really doing it, if you're doing it, department by department, for example, then you're working on one department, focusing on one set of potential problems, and then moving on to the next, using lessons learned from the first one to the next one, etc. So we really emphasize a phased approach where you break the production phase down into manageable chunks. And yeah, that's one of our key methodologies. Johanny, you want to
Great. Governance, yeah, the most exciting piece, right? Governance is a process of control and a strategy of like what, when, and how to change your structure. So if you have a good governance plan, that plan should answer questions like, oh, who is the SharePoint administrator? Who is responsible to add users to the different sites? Who is responsible to support this system? What happens if I need to add a library? Or what happens if I need to add, you have a team that needs all of a sudden one site. Who makes those decisions? So a good governance plan will inform all of that, and we'll have that in place. So one of the, one example that I like to give is, who managed existing metadata. So we just, recently we just had a kind of a deploying the first meeting to deploy this solution at one of our clients. And, one of the staff said, I don't see, I think I need one, term for, it doesn't, all of these terms that I have here, that they don't kind of, fall into the document that I'm creating. So I need to add term X. And so she was asking into like, what is the process of going through this, and what if I want to add my own tags? So all of that was already stipulated on the governance plan, and the IT director was kind of the one overseeing all of that, and that's something that he will kind of make the decision on what to add that term or not. So it's important to have a good governance plan that kind of help you with all of that. So I'm gonna just move plug along. We have 2 more minutes. So the next is tips. Just quickly go through the tips and tricks on how do you avoid an implementation failure. So again, be focused and understand the problem you're solving. Make like a good example, if you just want to get rid of your file server because it's a Windows 2003 and you don't need it there anymore, and you don't want to move to Windows 20, that's not a good business use case. And so make sure you think that through. Make sure that you align the solution that you pick with your organizational strategy. Governance early on. Like, don't wait until the last minute to draft your plan. Make sure that that plan, it's, established since the beginning, and, and you just add pieces to that plan as you move along through your implementation. Get executive buy-in and involve your users early on. And I think we have talked about involving your users and your champions and all of that. So, and because of time, I'm not gonna go through that. But this is a very important piece, executive buy-in. So how do you kind of, get buy-in from your boss? Focus on the problem you're trying to solve. And I think we have hammered that. And hopefully, if the one thing you're taking off this webinar is make sure you're trying to solve the right problem with SharePoint. So, and if possible, don't mention the solution, because honestly, your boss is not interested in if you're using Google versus SharePoint versus OneDrive. All they want to know what they're gaining. So make sure you outline a good use case, outline all the pain points and challenges that this solution will solve, and put there on your plan on how much time you think this will reduce from your users. Because remember, time equals money, and money is what executives are focused on. If you can save time, make users happy, and save the organization dollars, believe me, you will win the case. The other one is, communicate, follow up, and provide updates to your boss along the process. And by the way, if possible, have your champions do the talking. If your boss hears from other people and all the users and your champions, they're gonna more likely be kind of, happy with what you're proposing and get that buy-in from them. And be upfront also about all the potential costs and pain points, but put that in perspective. I'm going to use I need a $2,000 tool, but oh wait, we're going to move the content, but look, we are going to save 20 hours every month because, we were using that much time and kind of going through, this business manual process. So that's so that's important, some tips on executive buy-in. Metadata is a headache. Don't overdo it. We already talked about this. And automate the metadata assignment. And SharePoint actually has a built-in solutions where you can actually automate this metadata assignment. So, whenever you kind of team up with your vendor or the IT partner that is going to help you with this implementation, ask about it. So, there's ways for you to assign metadata and your users don't even have to enter anything. So try to automate that. Abdul.
Yes, thanks, Johanny. So I'm going to go through this, a little fast because I know we're at time. So start small, build in smaller chunks, use a pilot site because it helps with user adoption, helps with training users early in the process, getting them engaged early in the process, helps you get feedback. Also for the production, also start small, work in manageable chunks. Don't try and move all departments at a time or all regional offices at a time. Do one department at a time because you're getting lessons learned and you're able to troubleshoot one set of problems at a time, not all problems at a time. Identify your wins as you go along. So as Johanny has said, if you've done a good job of getting use cases, identifying the problem you're trying to solve, and SharePoint is the right tool for that, you should be able to, give clear examples across your entire organization about how SharePoint is, resolving its problems. And you might even need to do this on a department by department basis. So if there are problems in the accounting department that SharePoint can resolve, examine those and figure out how you're going to do that. If your programs group has different set of problems that SharePoint could resolve, identify that, and as you make these wins, emphasize it across the entire organization that the accounting department moved to SharePoint last month, and these are the wins they've had since they moved. They're like 10% faster because they're doing this one part of their job faster. Consistency. So this consistency in your design. This cannot be overemphasized because it goes a long way for future improvements. Obviously, when we start SharePoint, we typically start with the the basic file collaboration features, but then we build on more automation later on. If you've done a good job of design consistency with content type, metadata, etc., it really helps to build on this in the future. If your organization grows bigger and you need to make more changes, or if you just want to use more advanced features of the platform. It also helps with troubleshooting problems if you've got consistency, so that you're not like trying to figure out 10 different problems, where if you've got like 10 different designs for each of your departments. And then lastly, your champions. I mean, we've said this over and over again. You need to pick the right people to be your champions. Because they're going to help with user adoption, and this will drive the success of your implementation. They're going to help. They're going to be your evangelist to spread the message about your system. And in some cases, you will need to provide them with the appropriate resources, training, progress updates, wins when you have the wins, so that they can sell the system to the entire organization and get everyone on board. And then, John, you want to move on to the last? Then lastly, we've said this like over and over, show the benefits of the system. Show what problems you're trying to solve. This is one of the best ways to guarantee the success of your SharePoint deployment, is by making a clear connection between what SharePoint is doing and how it's solving a particular problem for an individual, for a department, and for the entire organization. So that's the last, I think, slide we have for the tips, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Abdul. And thank you all for attending our webinar. I hope this was helpful. And now we're gonna have Johan talk about next month's webinar.
Yes, thank you both. That was excellent. So next month, we're going to have our third and final installment in this quarter's series of webinars on SharePoint. And actually, we're going to look at alternatives to SharePoint for online document management. Specifically, we're going to look at Dropbox. We'll probably spend a little bit of time looking at Box. There are other ways to manage your documents online besides SharePoint that can be effective for organizations. And so we want to talk about those a little bit. So that's going to be the third Thursday. We're back to the third Thursday next month. So in the interest of time, I think I'm only going to field a couple questions here. So we'll start with any specific recommendations for software that can inventory files on a server.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we mentioned that it's a 3Size Pro. It's a good tool to do that. Abdul, do you have any others? I think 3Size is the one that we use, and actually it's very helpful.
3Size really checks all the boxes and does a good job. Gives you a graphical overview of your data and gives you some reports. Can get very granular if you want to get granular. So it's a really good tool for that initial content inventory.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And then someone was interested in just learning a little more. This is maybe a bit open-ended for a question this late in the webinar, but just curious about data loss prevention. What are some techniques or approaches, just real briefly, in SharePoint for dealing with data loss prevention?
I think you want to start with the governance plan. We kind of emphasized how this governance has to be something that starts from day one when you start thinking about using any document management tool or collaboration tool like this. Given how easy it is to get the content, you really want to be really careful. So I think starting with the governance plan is a jump off point. And then as you build your sites and your libraries, you need to make, and this is part of the governance, you need to make decisions around who can access what and why. You can also set up triggers that, when sensitive data is accessed, maybe someone gets a report. I mean, that might be overkill for most of our clients, but it is possible. So, and there are specific data loss prevention tools in SharePoint that, do a little bit more. For instance, you could mask all social security numbers whenever someone tries, whenever a sequence of 9 numbers are typed in. So that's just kind of one example of kind of how of some of the features.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, yeah, those are very helpful. Versioning too, I think that's another one too that that you want to make sure you add on your governance and implement that at your document library level. And if the data loss prevention, the question is coming from, I have this tool and I'm going to migrate my content to the different libraries. How do I make sure that that content actually got migrated as I want it? And those tools that we use to migrate content actually have reports built in that can tell you, what data got migrated versus, what data did not and what were the errors, so that you can go back, check that, and fix the errors, and then try to migrate that content again.
Great. And then also, you may have touched on this a little bit before, there is an emerging field of third-party cloud-based services that will back up SharePoint content. Most of those are actually focused more on Office 365 Exchange, on backing up mailboxes, as well as OneDrive, but we're starting to see a lot of those services adding support for SharePoint as well. So that's really important.
Yep.
Finally, last question for today. Obviously, SharePoint has been around for a long time, and this may actually be something that we addressed in our previous webinar on unselling SharePoint. But any thoughts on, how to basically, if you're rolling out SharePoint with staff who've had previous bad experiences with SharePoint, or an organization that maybe has had previous bad experiences with SharePoint, any specific tips for how to proceed with a new SharePoint Online project implementation?
I think we've highlighted, so great question. I think we've highlighted this a little bit. I think a direct connection has to be made between the current problems that SharePoint is trying to solve and how it impacts, individual users, departments, and the entire organization. So SharePoint might not be the right tool, and that might be the reason why the initial deployment failed potentially, or some earlier iterations of SharePoint were not as mature as what's available now, so that could also have been it. But it's very, very important that early on in the process, you're really saying, okay, we're trying to do point one, and SharePoint can do point one. This is how it's going to do point one, and go down that list, and talk to stakeholders and colleagues, and make sure that they all see like a direct connection between a feature in SharePoint and a need that the organization has.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know, John, if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I think you nail it. And I think we mentioned that a few times in the webinar. You want to make sure that you identify that low-hanging fruit, and I think the benefits of and the results and the return of investment of implementing that automation of a process, it speaks for itself. So I think and if you make that direct connection, and your champions are involved, and they are kind of the ones talking about it, SharePoint is going to sell by itself.
I know that our colleague Steve Longenecker sometimes talks about not even using the term. If you go into Office 365 and click on the app menu, SharePoint actually is labeled Sites, and there's some growing sense, early sense maybe, from Microsoft that they're going to downplay SharePoint as sort of the back end and focus more on just sites where you have your documents or document libraries, or using other tools that they're building like Delve to access the documents. So it could be that Microsoft will eventually eliminate the term altogether. Too soon to say, certainly.
Yeah, although and I and you're right. I think that we heard that from Microsoft for a while, but actually, they on the conference that I attended, they actually were talking about changing the sites again back to SharePoint because of the success that and all of that. So it's coming back.
Yeah, I think it's going to be in the third or fourth quarter of the year. They're actually so the site's going to be renamed to SharePoint.
Yeah, and that speaks to the, not only to the success, but I think the level of commitment from Microsoft that is making.
Interesting. Well, that's some, at least for me, late breaking news. We all learned something from these webinars. So thank you both again very much for sharing your time and your expertise with us today. When you leave the webinar, thank you to those of you who are able to stick around for kind of the after party portion of the webinar. And when you leave the webinar, when the webinar ends, we're going to send you a quick survey. We certainly appreciate the time you take to fill that out. It gives us a lot of great feedback on how to make these better. If you want to go back and review the webinar, if you missed anything, we're going to post the slides to our SlideShare account and the recording to our YouTube channel, and all of that will be linked to from our website, where you can connect with us, and we encourage you to register for next month's webinar. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful long holiday weekend, and look forward to your joining us next month. Take care.